Right, I think we are up and running now and recording. So welcome everybody. Thank you for coming and finding out all about the Year Six SATs, which are going to be taking place in a matter of weeks, really, when you think about it in terms of school life. Monday the 13th of May to Thursday the 16th of May. Myself and Mr. Gobbert Brown are going to be leading the session because Mr. Stewart is out with the football team at the moment. And saying previously, before I was a head teacher, I was a year six teacher for many, many years. So I know lots of information about the SATs. I sort of take a lead overall because they are statutory assessments. So there's lots of legalities around them as well. So hopefully between us, we should be able to answer any questions that you may have. So the aims of this session are just to provide you with an overview of the Year Six SATs, what tests the children will be sitting, what days, etc., what the tests look like, what type of questions the children will be answering, what the results look like, what happens to the results, and also how best you can support your child through the Year Six SATs. I suppose myself and Mr. Gobbert Brown are quite unusual in the fact that we get really excited about it. It's actually a really positive experience. The children quite often, I think last year, were saying it was their favourite week of the year, because we try and make it as positive an experience as possible. Sort of nationally, I know people talk about being a stressful experience. We really try and emphasise sort of make it as positive, make it as friendly, make it as supportive a process as possible. So we hope that you kind of get that picture as we go through. This slide just is a quick overview of where these assessments sit in terms of their school career as a whole. So you can see here the Key Stage 2 SATs take place in Year 6. We do call them the Year Six SATs because they happen in Year 6, but they very much are a test and assessment of their learning across Key Stage 2. So they're learning from Year 3 to the end of Year 6, and they reflect all of the things that they've learned in those 4 years. So whilst we call them the Year 6 SATs, they don't just assess the learning in that 1 year, they assess the learning across 4 years, and they're one of a number of statutory tests that children will do in their school career, starting at the foundation stage profile, the baseline tests in reception, the Year 1 phonics screening tests, which are one of the statutory tests. The Key Stage 1 SATs are now optional for the first time this year. They used to be statutory. The multiplication tables check that they would have done last year online is a statutory test. And the Key Stage 2, the Year 6 tests are statutory. These are the first ones really, though, that I suppose they will sit in terms of those exam conditions, and they have to take place on a certain day and within certain time limits as well. So in that way, although they have done statutory tests before, this is their first experience of those sort of exam conditions, but we do try and make it as sort of stress-free as possible, and I'll talk about examples of that later on. After that, they obviously go to secondary school, where it's teacher assessment, and the next formal set of exams they will do are GCSEs at the end of Year 11. So again, a little bit of a background to these assessments. The SATs have been in place for a really, really, really long time. If you've got much older children who took the SATs before 2016, they will have done slightly different ones, and there was a level system then. These new STAR SATs have been in place from 2016, at the time when they first started testing that new national curriculum. And the idea is that children are expected to meet a set of targets for their age group. So the government has set these particular statements, these targets, and we call them age-related expectations. So ARE, so if you hear the term ARE, means age-related expectations. It's what the children are supposed to know or expected to know by the end of Year 6. And those age-related expectations reflect the challenge of the curriculum. So those expectations have increased over the years, but they are set by the government, and that's what the children are assessed against.
Right, so yeah, I'm going to be talking to you about what those age-related expectations are for each of the different subjects. Starting with reading. So what you can see on the screen right now is for children working at the expected standard at those age-related expectations, they should be able to do all of these things below on the bullet points. So I'll go through a few of them, but I won't read them all out to you. But it's working out the meaning of words from context, explaining and discussing their understanding of what they've read, drawing inferences and using evidence from the text. So these are all the elements that get assessed during the reading paper. With the new system that's passed levels, the children will either achieve the expected standard or they won't. They'll be classed as either working towards or working at the expected standard. And so with reading, with spelling and grammar and maths, there's no teacher assessment. It's all based on these SATs papers that they will be taking. And then writing as well. I'll tell you a little bit about that later, how that one gets assessed, because that one's slightly different. But those are the age-related expectations for reading. And then on the next slide, here's the ones for writing. So for that one, the child needs to be able to show that they can write effectively for a range of purposes. And that's why instead of it being a test paper where we say you've got 1 hour to write about these things, we'll draw from all their work that they've done throughout year 6, all the different styles of writing they've done, all those different things across all their lovely topic books. That's what we'll draw from to show their writing standards. So that's why this one is a little different to the SATs papers. So writing is all just from their previous work. And for this one, you've got the working towards the expected standard, working at the expected standard, or working at greater depth within the expected standard. And so there's different levels to this one, but working at the expected standard is the main area we're aiming for, and then some children will be working at that greater depth standard. I'll go through this one at the bottom. Maintain legibility and joined handwriting when writing at speed. There's all these different areas that will be assessed, and so it may not be that their handwriting is perfect across every single piece of work, but if we can sort of show that they can achieve that, they will be able to achieve that working at the expected standard. It's finding elements of these bullet points across their work rather than just it being in every single piece of work. There's more on the next slide is the working at greater depth standards for writing. So it's all of the ones that are here. And then in addition to that, they need to be able to distinguish between the language of speech and writing, choose the appropriate register. It's really developing that sort of flow with their writing. That's what pushes them over into the greater depth standard, where all these different elements that they've learned across Key Stage 2, they're putting them together and they've got a piece of work that really flows. That's kind of where they end up in the greater depth standard, using the range of grammar, range of punctuation taught at Key Stage 2, using it fluidly and fluently, I would say. There are no additional statements for spelling or handwriting. So it's the same stuff for working at the expected standard, but then in addition, these extra bullet points as well. And then maths for the age-related expectations. There's all these different areas. There's a lot of different areas in maths, and that's why there's the 3 papers that they do that we'll be going into a bit more detail about what the differences for those are. But if you just have a look at these on here, you can see all the different bullet points. There's using formal methods, there's some mental calculations, understanding of place value, fractions, decimals, and percentages. And there's more on the next slide as well. There's more fractions, decimals, and percentages. We've got using the perimeter and area, calculating loads and loads of different areas that they've been learning all the way throughout Key Stage 2 that contribute to them getting that age-related expectation in maths. And these are split across all 3 of those papers. Well, that's me for maths, isn't it?
Okay.
Yep.
So an overview. So the subjects that are assessed in the SATs are for English, grammar, punctuation, and spelling. So there's a separate assessment for that. Reading, and the reading assessment takes the form of a written comprehension, and we'll show some examples of those questions a little bit later. Writing is assessed, but as Mr. Godbert Brown said, it's assessed internally, there is no exam, there's no written formal timed assessment for writing. It's assessed using their ongoing work. So we assess it internally, looking at their books, looking at the different styles and pieces of writing that they've done across the year. A sample of schools get moderated, so we make our judgments, and based on the criteria that Mr. Gobbett-Brown shared, we may be moderated by the local authority, where they will just say and check our judgments against national standards, but we do the assessment for the writing. All the others are done through the tests. So the formal test for grammar, punctuation and spelling, a formal test for reading, and in maths, as Mr. Gobbett-Brown says, there are 3 tests. Paper 1 is arithmetic, and we'll show again examples of that. There used to be a mental maths test where you used to have questions read aloud, sort of on I was about to say cassette, which really shows my age, or a CD, but that got replaced with an arithmetic paper, and then papers 2 and 3 are the reasoning paper there as well, and we'll show some examples of that. But because of the amount of content for maths, it's split into 3 papers. We do assess for science. We do assess to say whether a child is at age-related expectations or not at age-related expectations for science. But again, that's a teacher assessment. There's no formal test. It's assessed through their ongoing science units, their work throughout the year, and the science knowledge and investigation skills that they demonstrate in their books. So in terms of, we're always asked, what about if my child has SEND? And I'll talk a little bit later about specific access arrangements that we can put in place. The government does recommend that where possible, all children in year 6 should sit the tests in order to track their progress from year 2. So they would have to be, incredibly below where they should be in order for us to disapply them from the tests. And they recommend that where possible, all children in year 6 do have a go. And remember, the tests assess the learning across Key Stage 2. So there are questions from their year 3 learning, from their year 4 learning. So all children should be able to access at least some of the questions, even if they have SEND. There are specific things that we can put in place for children who have an education healthcare plan. If you've got an EHCP, you automatically get 50% extra time in the tests. And if you have, then there's other sort of, if you have other issues or other things that you struggle with, then you can apply for additional time for certain aspects, things like reading speed, writing speed, processing difficulties. We can apply for additional time there, and we can talk to you about that separately. So there shouldn't be any reason why children with SEND can't access the tests to some degree. And similarly, more able learners, they are designed to assess learning across the Key Stage 2 curriculum, but some questions towards the final part of the test do include a little bit of content, particularly in the maths tests and the grammar tests from Key Stage 3, which is year 7 to 9. I always say to the children, that sometimes they really beat themselves up if they don't finish the test and don't answer all the questions. Those last few questions are deliberately designed to be challenging and for those children who are working sort of above age-related expectations. So it enables us to identify those children who we would say are working at the higher standard, which we also call greater depth. And this is what the timetable looks like. So the tests take place on from the 13th to the 16th of May. This is a nationally set timetable. So all children in year 6 across the country will all sit the English grammar, punctuation and spelling tests on the Monday. It is up to schools to decide when during the day we do it. They can be done administered between a certain time window. Most schools do them in the morning because that's when the children are fresher. So we will do the 2 English grammar and punctuation and spelling tests on the Monday. Paper 1, which is short questions, lots of questions about grammar, punctuation and so on. And then paper 2 is a spelling paper. And again, we'll give examples of what that looks like. On the Tuesday, they have one paper, which is the reading paper, which lasts for about an hour. The grammar punctuate, the short answer questions for paper one, I think is it 50 minutes, Mr. GB? It's about, I think it's 50 minutes.
45, I believe.
45 minutes. Paper two, the spelling isn't timed, because we read the spellings out and then the children write them down. The reading paper is an hour, so that's the longest out of all of the papers, and because they have to have time to read the texts and answer the questions on them. On Wednesday, they sit two papers, the maths paper one, which is an arithmetic paper, which is 30 minutes, and then maths paper two, the reasoning paper, which is 40 minutes. And then on Thursday, the final paper, maths paper three, which is the second of the reasoning papers, again is 40 minutes. And what happens is that for the maths, they add up the total of the scores for all three papers to give one score. So it's really important that the children sit all three papers. They don't get a separate score for each one. They get a total score for all three. And similarly with the grammar, punctuation and spelling, the score for the short answer questions is added to the score for the spellings to give a total score. The writing assessment, as Mr. GB said, is teacher assessed, and is based on that mixture of writing assessments and independent tasks that have taken place throughout the year. You will have all of these codes when you get the results, and I'll show you an example of what the results look like at the end, but there'll be we will assess against those age-related expectations, those criteria that we showed you earlier, and children will be assessed as either working below the Key Stage 2 standards, working, which means that they would be assessed on target. So we would say that they're not even working at Year 3 level, they're working at sort of Key Stage 1 level. They would be working towards the expected standard. So they're not quite at the expected standard for Year 6, but they are working within that key stage. Working at the expected standard, so they've achieved all of those things that they needed to have achieved by the end of Year 6. And for some children, we would say they are working at greater depth within the expected standard, which means they're achieving some of those higher level skills and demonstrating some of those things through their writing. But again, you will get the result for that at the same time as the actual SATs test results, but that is teacher assessed.
All right, so now we're going to go through what the papers actually look like, and so show you some examples. So starting with English reading, what you can see up here is one of the reading papers from, this is last year's paper. So they get a single paper with questions based on 3 passages of text. They're mostly fiction, but sometimes you'll have a range, sometimes you'll have a poem, a piece of non-fiction. It varies. They get 1 hour, including the reading time, to complete the test. And they're encouraged to work text by text. So work on read the first text, do the first set of questions, and so on, which gives them around 20 minutes for each text. But as you'll see in a minute, they sort of get progressively trickier as they go through. Children may keep the booklet and should refer to it when answering questions. So they're encouraged to keep the booklet open on their desk and keep referring back. The reading paper's great because all the answers are in there, is what we keep telling them. Like, they've got to just keep looking and find those answers. That's that. We'll show you some bits from inside in a minute. The types of questions you get, and there's a range. So it's not all just writing responses. There's like multiple choice questions, ranking and ordering, like number these events to show, just like retrieve where they happen in the story. We've got labeling, finding and copy. This one's quite frequently they say find and copy one word, or find one sentence and copy based on different parts. And I've been really making sure they find that word and spell it exactly as they see it, because they're copying it. Short responses, they'll have in the side of the page, it tells them whether it's a 1 mark, a 2 mark, or a 3 mark question, and they'll have the length of box will sort of show them how much they need to write or how much evidence they need to provide for that as well. And so those ones at the bottom, they're the open-ended responses, such as look at the sentence that begins once upon a time. How does the writer increase the tension throughout this paragraph? explain fully, referring to the text. So if they're making that point, they're getting a piece of evidence from the text and sort of explaining why that proves their point. So here is an example. This is what the paper looks like. So they get two different papers for this. They get the reading booklet and then the answer booklet just behind there. And they have them both out on their desks at the same time to be able to refer to both. And yet remembering that there are 1, 2, or 3 marks available for each question. So here is the 3 texts that we had last year. So we had A Noise in the Night, Bats Under the Bridge, A Howl at Dusk. It all sort of followed a similar kind of theme, but they will be expected to work on one of the texts, answer all the questions, and then move through. So it's really important for them to sort of keep going and move on to those next texts, because you wouldn't want to end up running out of time after you're only on the second text. So we will give them sort of prompts to move forward and
It's
keep
worth
going with
saying
those
these are just
questions.
snippets of the text.
Yeah.
They're not that short. They
Yeah.
are they're about the first they get progressively trickier. So the first text is an easier one to read, it has more simplified vocabulary. It's about 1.5 pages, and the most it will be for the third text is sort of 2 pages. It's sort of 1 or 2 pages roughly.
Yeah, and they're all taken from real texts. So some of them are from books, some of them are from newspaper articles, and so they're texts that are similar to ones the children will have encountered before. And especially when we've been doing all these practice papers, they know the sort of level that those texts will be at. And so yeah, on the next slide is some of those examples of those multiple choice type questions. At the start there, you've got true or false, sort of tick the boxes, find this evidence, which one is correct. We've got how can you tell Priya was feeling nervous? Write 2 ways, so finding that evidence and explaining it. This one down in the bottom right here was actually a 3-mark question where they've got to find a positive message, and then next to that they need to provide the evidence, so a direct quote from the text to say, you know, she says this, or this was said in the text. And so yes, up to 3 marks is the maximum for some of the questions that are available. Here's some more. Drawing the lines, writing 2 reasons. So there's a big range of different types of answering. So it's really important they're reading those questions carefully so they know how to respond, like whether they should be circling, underlining, drawing lines. And yeah, they can earn up to 3 marks for each of these. Okay. And then, right, so next onto the grammar, punctuation, and spelling. This is made up of 2 different papers. So number 1 is the actual grammar test as it is. It's like a booklet with some grammar questions, and I'll show you some examples of them soon. That's 45 minutes, and it comprises of lots of multiple choice questions, lots of short answer questions. There are a lot of questions. There's around 50 in there, so they have to keep moving along quickly with this one, but they're all quite short responses compared to the reading one, where they might have to be expected to write a bit more. And then that's combined, the scores combined with the spelling test. It's a 20-word spelling test. They'll be given the paper that has sentences with a word missing so that they've got the context, and then we'll read them out. We have a specific way we read it. We say the word, then we say it in the sentence with its context, and then we read it out on its own again. And then yeah, there's no timing for that. So when it'll be me and Mr. Stewart delivering that, and we make sure that we read it, and we'll be checking to make sure everyone has finished writing before we move on to the next one. So it might take around 15 minutes, but we make sure that everyone has as much time as they need before we continue for that. But then, yeah, both of those get added together. So the spelling and the grammar paper get added together, and that's how they get their score for that one. And yeah, for the grammar test, these are the things that children are expected to know. So all the different types of word classes, nouns, verbs, conjunctions. We're doing lots and lots of revision of these at the moment. Different types of sentences, how they're constructed, clauses, conjunctions, different verb forms, tenses, punctuation, what all that different punctuation means and is used for, how to use it, vocabulary, standard English, and the spellings are, the spelling test might not always be spellings that are on that year 5 and 6 spelling list that we mentioned, but they'll be using the same spelling rules. They'll draw from that same kind of spelling. And so yeah, on the next few slides, we just got a few of those grammar questions. You'll see there multiple choice. And so this is a paper where I'd say, like, because there's 50 questions, 45 minutes, like if they're finding that they get stuck on a question, just move straight on to the next one. They can come back to it if they have time, but there's plenty of questions that they, they just give it their best reasoned guess, I suppose. They might even pick up some extra points. So it's important to just keep the pace moving. But yeah, ticking the boxes, we've got filling in boxes. There's the contracted forms. So just filling in sort of one word answers. The spelling is important in this paper for some questions. They do need to make sure they've got that spelling correct, otherwise they won't get it for some of the questions. So that's another thing that they can be doing when they're going back and checking their work. It's really important they're checking that they have spelled it correctly as well.
Yeah, for that one where you've got the answer would be doesn't, they would have to spell doesn't correctly, and the apostrophe would have to be in between the N and the T. So you would have to see all of those things for it to be marked correctly.
Yeah. And then, yeah, this one underneath, circle the two words in the sentence below that are synonyms. They've got to make sure that they're actually circling the word, not underlining it. I know sometimes people, because there's a range of different questions like this, sometimes people will underline it rather than circling it. And it's, I've been nagging them in class to do this as well. Like when they're checking back, make sure that they've done it exactly how the question's asking you to do it, because they do get scanned in to be marked as well. So some of these questions may just be marked by a computer. So they need to make sure that they are being accurate with that. On the next slide, there's one.
The answer to that one is lucky and fortunate. Just in
Yeah.
just in case any of you were wondering, lucky and fortunate are the two synonyms. But it relies on the children knowing that, so they can't, although they can put their hand up and ask for anything to be read out aloud to them, they couldn't say, what does the word synonym mean? They would need to know that synonyms are two words that are different but have a similar meaning. So it's knowing that sort of knowing all of that information is really important.
Yeah, and that's an important thing with the putting their hands up. We've been sort of training them when we've been doing our mock exams, but they are allowed to put their hands up for any question in the spelling and grammar paper to ask for it to be read out to them. And so for some of them, I've been encouraging them to do that as much as they can, because it might just help click in their brain and they get the answer. Yeah, this one, tick one box in each row to show whether the word after is used as a subordinating conjunction or as a preposition. And so
this one would be towards the end of the paper. Yeah. This is a really tricky one. So this one would be towards the end of the paper.
And that's how all of these papers sort of work. They start off with easier questions and they get progressively trickier as they go through, as they're moving up the key stage, I guess.
But again, as Mr. Gobert Brown says, they are really encouraged. There are 50 questions, 45 minutes. If you don't know it, it's fine. Move on to the next one. They're only worth 1 mark each. So, 1 or maximum 2 marks in this paper, but mainly 1 mark question. So, much better to just move on, come back to it later if you've got time.
Yeah, and then so the spelling test, it's unchanged from previous years. It's got 20 sentences that get read, and then they fill in the blank. And the words are taken from the rules seen in the Key Stage 2 spelling list. So yeah, they've been practicing those spelling lists. We've got them copies on every desk, but yeah, someone mentioned in the chat earlier if they could have a copy. Absolutely. We've got copies that we can send home with the children. If they just let us know, we can hand them out.
I mean, even if you can actually Google, Key Stage 2, Year 5 and 6 spelling list, they're readily available. But we can
and they're also the words from the super spellers. A lot of those words are from the Key Stage 2, and they're from those spelling lists. So they've been learning these as they go through Hill Morton anyway. It's just there is this Key Stage 2 official list as well. Yeah, this is what the test looks like. They'll get the paper with the words missing. I'll read them out 3 times. I'll say, like, for instance, for this first one, I'll say the word is creature. The dragon is an imaginary creature. The word is creature. So I'd say it 3 times, giving them space between each one so that they've definitely heard. And yeah, I won't move on until I know I'm confident that everyone's finished and written down their word. So yeah, they get as much time as is needed on that one.
And the children, of course, are encouraged to really write their answers clearly, because
Yes.
obviously they have to be read. So we need to be able to see the letters there. We don't mark these. All of these papers get sent off to be marked, and most of them are scanned. They're scanned through and marked by people that aren't used to reading their handwriting. So
Yeah.
they have to be written clearly. So
It doesn't have to
we'll
be
be walking
joined,
around
right?
checking that.
They can print the words on this paper, right? I'm
Yeah, they can do.
pretty
Yeah,
sure.
they
Yeah.
can do.
So I know some people were worried about handwriting and whether it could be read for the spelling test. To make it really, really clear, they can just print the letters.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so for the maths, there are 3 papers, an arithmetic paper, which is 40 marks, 30 minutes long, and there are 2 reasoning papers. The reasoning papers, there isn't any difference between them. It's not one is harder than the other. Many years ago, there used to be a calculator and a non-calculator paper. They're not allowed calculators at all anymore. The reason there are 2 reasoning papers is just because there's so much content that they split them into 2 parts. We do provide some resources, and they have a mirror. So they've got a mirror that they can use for things like symmetry questions, a protractor for angle questions, a ruler, a pencil, and a rubber. But that's the only equipment they're allowed. Obviously, the children will spend time in class practicing using mirrors and protractors, so they know how to use that equipment. And sometimes there aren't any questions that you need a protractor for, but it's they sort of pop up every few years. So they will have all of that equipment. They will have their own equipment on their table for them to use. They don't need to share. This is just a little example. It shows a little breakdown to show what proportion of the learning of the questions comes from different year groups. And we were saying it is the year 6 test, but actually you can see from this test, 18 of the marks, 16% of the questions was from the year 3 learning. Going up to 44% of it from year 6. So even if the children aren't working at year 6 expectations, they can still access a large proportion of the paper. Those earlier questions, again, the maths tests, they start easier and they get trickier as they go through. So we encourage children. What we tend to find where you've got children who are really able in maths, they make mistakes in those early questions because they rush through them, go, oh, this is easy. They don't read them. And I always say that, 2 marks at the start of the paper is worth exactly the same as 2 marks at the end of the paper. Don't make those silly mistakes early on. They've got the time, work through each question carefully. But again, if they're not sure what to do, they can put their hand up. We can read any questions out to them in maths, and there'll be lots and lots of adults around to do that. And sometimes just hearing a question read aloud suddenly makes it all sort of click in place. So we really encourage children to do that. And again, if they're stuck, move on to the next one. They can always come back to it later at the end if they want to. Arithmetic paper 1, what we call these are pure calculations. So they are just they're not word problems, they're just the number questions, and I'll show you an example of that. They are column addition, column subtraction, long multiplication, long division, some simple decimals, some simple percentages, so 10% of 60, for example, and they'll need to know square numbers, and there's some fraction questions, so fractions of numbers, and some adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing fractions. But they don't need to unpick what the question is from a word problem. It's just number questions, and they answer them on the paper. So they need to know all of those things, and the children practice learning all of those things. So they'll practice addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. They'll practice finding percentages of numbers. They'll practice finding, what is, 3/5 of a number. They'll practice doing that. This is some examples of what those questions look like. So this is a 2-mark question, and it's a long multiplication question. You can see they give you the squares on the actual paper. The children do their working out on there. it's a 2-mark question. So we do encourage the children, if they get the right answer and they put the answer in the box, they automatically get the 2 marks, whether or not they show they're working out or not. But we encourage children to show they're working out, because if they did the calculations and then make a silly mistake, they would get 1 mark, because we can see that they've shown they're working out and they've just made one little error there. So they are encouraged to show they're working out on that squared paper. Another one, this is another 2-mark question, a long division question, 3016 divided by 13. There are some easier ones. These are sort of later on in the paper. An example of fraction, so multiplying fractions, so 1/4 multiplied by 1/8. And the strategy, you know, the children have learnt the strategies there. You multiply the numerators, multiply the denominators. So 1 times 1 is 1, 4 times 8 is 32, so it'd be 1/32 would be the answer there. And they would put that in the box at the bottom.
All right, and then the next 2 papers, the reasoning papers 2 and 3, have more context to the questions, and they include different topics such as geometry, ratios, there's charts and tables that they'll need to decipher, units and measures, shapes and their properties, Roman numerals, averages, all these different things. There are still some calculations, and you'll have word problems that they'll have to unpick those questions from, but that's what sort of makes the reasoning papers different to the paper 1. What is also an important thing to remember with papers 2 and 3 is that they don't get, paper 3 is not harder than paper 2. They're pitched at the same level. They both work through the same way as all the other papers. They'll start with that kind of year 3, 4, and they'll move through. So it's paper 2 and 3. Sometimes people put paper 3 up on this pedestal like it's the harder paper. It's not. They're all they all start at the same level, and as they go through the paper, they get trickier. But yeah, the reasoning paper, here are some examples of questions within them. So they'll be a bit longer. They'll have information to look through. There's a lot more sort of 2-mark questions available. Here's one where they're going to have to look at the scale there and figure out how much money is being made in each month. And then they might have more than one part to the question as well. So with this one, they've got write the name of each month where they collected more than £50. That would be worth a mark. And then underneath, there's another question relating to the same context where they can get more marks as well. There's also graph work and geometry, and this one's a translation work. So they need to use a ruler, really important to translate and move that shape to its new position. So they'd use those strategies we've been learning in class to follow those points and move it along so that the shape is moved to area B. Then we've got on the next slide another one of those questions. Now this one's got the little box saying show your method on it. And that's, like Mrs. Harrison was saying a minute ago, that's one of those questions where if they do show their method, even if they don't get the final answer correct, they'll be able to pick up 1 mark if they've shown that they know what they should be doing, if they've shown that they've just made one small mistake along the way, because a lot of these questions have multiple steps to get to. So for this one, they've got to look at all the different ingredients. Stefan's only got 300 milliliters of cream to make chocolate ice cream. How much chocolate should he use? So we've been doing questions like this in class this week. Actually, they'd have to look at the different areas. They could put it into ratio, fractions, and then find out their answer. But as long as they're showing their steps, what they're doing, they might pick up that mark, even if they don't get the question fully correct at the end. And then the next one is a graph showing the maximum temperature for 5 days. For what fraction of the 5 days was the maximum temperature below 10 degrees Celsius? So they'd be looking and reading the graph and interpreting the data to find out those answers. That one would probably be a 1-mark question, but there might even be an extra bit underneath it with additional parts to the question. But that's the kind of thing that they'll be facing on the reasoning paper 2 and 3. Okay,
so the children will sit the tests, and then what will happen is again, it's all very official. They get delivered in sort of sealed plastic wrap. We open those tests in front of the children, so we're not allowed to open them early. We open them in front of the children, and similarly when we collect them back in, they get collected. I have to be observed, packaging them up in a particular way, and they get sent off to be marked. So the whole process, as you can imagine, every year 6 child in the country is doing the tests on the same week. Takes quite a long time because they have to be sent off. They have to be collected by courier. They then get marked. They then get recorded. And so we get the results back in early July. In the first week of July, we will get the results back to us. As soon as we get them back to us, you will get them. It's usually around the same time that you'll get your school report. If they come earlier, it really is about as quickly as we can process it and type it up into the letter. You'll have that because we know that the children and you are anxious to find out how they get on. But they'll be reported, they get reported to parents and children as part of their annual school report. Those results do get passed on to secondary schools. It's part of the information that we are required to transfer over. What secondary schools do with them varies from secondary school to secondary school. Some will say, oh, we don't take any interest in them at all. We do our own assessments. They are used as they are a formal baseline. So they are on the child's record, and they are sort of used as a sort of a predictor of how that child might then achieve in GCSE. So they do get passed on to secondary schools alongside those teacher assessments in writing and science. And they are also used sort of as a whole. The data as the whole cohort, not individual data, is used to create league tables, and we have to publish that on our school website. We don't publish individual scores, we publish percentages as a group. So what percentage of our year sixes achieved the age-related standard in reading, what percentage achieved the greater depth standard. So the results are presented to you in a couple of different ways. So as we've said, each test is out of a particular number of marks. So for example, the reading test is out of 50 marks. So when you get the results back, you will find out your child's raw score, so the actual number of marks they got. So for example, if they got 26 out of 50 or 28 out of 50. What then happens is that gets translated into a scaled score, which is between 80 and 120. So if they get full marks on it, 50 out of 50, their scaled score will be 120. If they get 0 out of 50, their scaled score will be 80. So that's the scaled score there. The scaled score for a child that has achieved the average mark for their age group nationally, if they've achieved the national standard, is 100. So we're really aiming for as many children as possible to be 100 or above. Now, we can't tell you what score that will be because that changes every single year, depending on, they look at all of the results that all the children get nationally and they decide what the score will be. So for example, last year, to get 100 as a scaled score in reading, the reading test, they needed to have got 24 marks out of 50. The year below, in order to get the age-related standard of 100, they needed to have got 29 out of 50. So it was a harder paper last year, so they lowered that score, but it's around that level. And so if they are achieving 100 or above, they have reached age-related expectations. If they have achieved 110 or above, we would say the child is working at greater depth at the higher standard. So our aim is for all children to get 100 or above. If your child is really achieving well and getting at greater depth standard, they would be 110 or above. And again, this will all be explained in the letter that you get. A child with a score below 100 is recorded as working towards the national standard. 100 plus will have achieved the national standard. And a child with 110 or more will have achieved that high score and be recorded as working at greater depth within the national standard. And it's worth saying, it is impossible to get greater depth in science. We only assess as either working below or working at age-related expectations. We sometimes get parents saying, why have they got greater depth in all of the areas but only expected in science? That's because it's impossible to get the greater depth in science. We can't award that at all. And you will get the raw score, the scaled score, and whether they've reached the national standard for that subject. And this is an example, a little snippet of what that letter looks like. So I've populated some answers in there as an example. So for English reading there, this imaginary child got 31 out of 50, which gave a scaled score of 105. So they achieved the expected standard. In the grammar, punctuation, and spelling, the two tests combined added up, they got 38 out of a possible 70, which gave them a scaled score of 101, which meant they were achieving the expected standard. For writing, there's no test, but the teacher has assessed them as being at the expected standard. And in maths, they've done very well. They got 102 out of 110. And they therefore got a scaled score of 113, which meant that they were at greater depth within the standard there. And you can see within science, again, the teacher assessment, they've got the expected standard. And there's a little key underneath it. And that will be in the letter that you will receive with the results on. So it's really clear what their test score is, their scaled score is, and whether they've achieved the standard or not. Okay, so in terms of what we do, what we do to support, we try and make it as stress-free a process as it is possible to make it. We don't sort of sit the children in the hall, which is a really unfamiliar environment. They're not used to working there, so they will take their tests upstairs in year 6. We actually do 2 groups, so we do 2 sittings of the tests. So because they have to have a certain space and they have to have a desk of their own, we'll do one group, we'll take it first, while the other group will be going and doing some revision over in the phys lab, and then they'll swap over and the other group will come and do their tests. We have to keep them apart, it's all very official, but they will be in a familiar environment with familiar adults. So Mr. Gobert Brown, Mr. Stewart will be there with delivering the tests. You know, Mrs. Gooman, Mrs. Halford will be there, and there will be a number of additional adults there for any children that need any questions reading out as well. So there'll be lots and lots of familiar adults there supporting. We don't have sort of invigilators that they've never met coming and doing it. So it's a really familiar environment. The only thing that will be slightly strange for them is that we have to cover up the displays in the classroom, because obviously we can't have spelling lists up on the wall if we're testing them for the spelling. So we cover up all the displays, but it will still be that familiar room. We can do an awful lot of different things to support. We can read, and they can put their hand up for every test, apart from obviously the reading test. We can read out the questions in maths, grammar, punctuation. Some children, if they qualify, can get extra time. So there is a criteria for it, and we'll make you aware if your child gets extra time. Things like if they struggle with processing, if they have a diagnosed condition, which means they're very, very slow at writing and struggle with writing, or very, very slow at reading, then they can qualify. We have to apply online and they can qualify for extra time. If your child has condition which means they can't write, so we had a child last year who broke their wrist the week before, the weekend before the SATs, then somebody can scribe for them and they will automatically get additional time for that. If they've got handwriting that is really difficult to read, then what will happen is somebody will sit next to them, will read it through before they leave the test conditions, and we can annotate above any words that we think the person that's marking it might struggle to read. And again, if you've got a child who struggles to maintain concentration or needs some emotional support, they can have a familiar adult sat next to them throughout the whole test if needed, keeping them on task, keeping them prompted, encouraging them, keeping them going, and all of those things can be in place. As Mr. GB said, they have done loads of tests. They're so used to answering these questions. Actually, it's just another one when they come to test week. It's not particularly intimidating. They're not facing these questions for the first time. They'll have seen lots of similar questions. And we also we have a free breakfast club the week of the SATs on the Monday to the Thursday. So we invite the children to come in from sort of 8:30 onwards. They have a drink. We have some toast and some cereal bars and some juice. And it's really lovely. If the children are feeling a bit nervous, they come in. It's a really chilled out environment. They can chat to their friends, and it just makes them they sort of come in, they're a bit more relaxed. Makes them feel a bit special, and we can make sure they're all there and prepared, ready for them to start their tests at the time that we need to get them started. And again, then support from you is really important. Obviously, these are, statutory tests, so it's really important that the children are there throughout the week. And if they haven't arrived by a particular time, you'll be getting a phone call, because we have to account for where all of the children are. So yeah, attendance throughout the week, and we do encourage them to try and attend that breakfast club if they want. It is really lovely. Try and encourage them to get to bed early on the night before, so they've got enough sleep. And again, any support with home learning, we send lots of different things out, lots of homework tasks. And again, if you know that there are any issues or concerns, just communicate with us. If they're not feeling very well, or they have got a headache, then we can put things in place to support them. If they're particularly worried about something, just tell us about it sooner rather than later. We can make all sorts of different arrangements. And again, with that balance, yes, we want you to support them, but they do have to have that kind of that time, and we try and balance throughout the week. Yes, the afternoons we do touch on a bit of revision for the next day, but they also have sort of a bit of time where they can sort of just decompress and relax a little bit. Okay, I think, yes, I have come to the end of our presentation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop sharing. It is still recording. Have there been any? I've noticed there was a question in the chat earlier, Mr. GB, about the spelling list, but we can send those out, can't we?
Yeah, Mr. Stewart's just arrived as well. He's here. Well, we were just saying we're going to have a bunch printed out so children can take them home if anyone else wants one as well. But yeah, they're on the desks in the classrooms so that they've got access to them all the time in school. They obviously won't in the test week, but we'll have some that they can take home as well.
Brilliant. And as I say, any questions, please ask. You can contact Mr. Gobber Brown, Mr. Stewart, either on the door, or just sort of send us a message in the through Class Dojo, and we can get back and we can answer any questions or queries that you might have. And we'll be sending out more information nearer the time in terms of that SATs Breakfast Club and what it looks like. But we hope as many of the children attend as possible. Right, we hope you found that useful. We hope you found the information there useful. Again, any questions, please ask. Sort of no question is a stupid question, and we'll stay on the line for anybody that wants to sort of speak to us individually, or say just contact us through Class Dojo. And I will put a recording of this session on Class Dojo for everybody to be able to access. So thank you ever so much, everybody. I'm going to stop recording now, and then we'll say goodbye and a thank you.